She sat in the Phoenix courtroom, her dark hair neatly combed, both hands placed primly on the table in front of her. It had been nearly 5 years since the case began, but Jodi Arias' face showed no signs of fatigue or anxiety, no bowed head, no averted gaze, just an almost unnerving calm.
Jodi Arias killed Travis Alexander. There is no question about it. The million-dollar question is what would have forced her to do it. It was Travis's continual abuse. And on June 4th of 2008, it had reached a point of no return. And sadly, Travis left Jodi no other option but to defend herself.
Her lawyers had spent months building a different narrative. They said she was the victim. They said she was cornered, attacked, forced to defend herself. They emphasized that what happened in the Mesa house was not murder, but a desperate act of survival. That strategy seemed to be working. They objected relentlessly to evidence. They questioned every detail in the investigative file. They tried to create doubt wherever possible. And through it all, Jodi sat there listening, occasionally leaning over to confer with her attorney, nodding slightly as if she understood every next move. No panic. No loss of control. Just one very clear feeling. She believed she was one step ahead of everyone. In her mind, no one truly knew what had happened on June 4, 2008. No witness stepped out of that bathroom. No one saw Travis Alexander's final moments. And most importantly, everything had been handled. What needed to be erased had been erased. What needed to be hidden had been hidden. She believed she had left no trace. But what you were about to see is the moment that story began to collapse. This is the case of a woman who believed she had perfectly concealed a crime inside her victim's own home. And every detail you're about to hear has been verified through court records, police reports, forensic results, and trial testimony. On June 9, 2008, 5 days after Travis Alexander went silent, the lack of contact began to worry those around him. Travis was not the type to disappear without explanation. He had a clear schedule, stayed in regular touch with friends, and was preparing for an important trip in the coming days. But his phone went unanswered. Messages went without reply. Calls kept going to voicemail. At first, people thought he might just be busy or away unexpectedly. But as the second day passed, then the third, then the fourth, unease began to spread. By the fifth day, a group of Travis's friends decided they could wait no longer. They drove to his house in Mesa, Arizona to check on him. When they arrived, nothing from the outside suggested anything was wrong. The house looked quiet. The front yard was unchanged. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. But as soon as they stepped onto the porch, one small detail stopped them. The door was unlocked. That was not like Travis. He was careful. They opened the door and stepped inside. A long, heavy silence. They moved deeper into the house, steps slowing as the feeling of dread grew stronger. And then one of them saw the first thing. On the floor, near the hallway leading to the bedroom, there were dark stains. Not water, not shadows. Blood. Long streaks, not a single spot, but a trail leading straight toward the bathroom. No one spoke. They knew what it meant. The bathroom door was opened, and what they saw inside was a scene none of them could ever forget. Travis lay in the shower, his body in an unnatural position as if he had been dragged there after the attack. Blood covered every surface. Walls. Floor. Sink. Even areas higher than arm's reach had spatter. This was not a quick attack. This was prolonged, ferocious, and deliberate. When police arrived, they quickly secured the scene and began documenting every detail. What they found was not an ordinary homicide. The autopsy report later confirmed Travis had been stabbed between 27 and 29 times. One wound went through his heart. A deep slash ran from ear to ear, nearly severing his throat. And in addition to all of that, there was a single .25 caliber gunshot to the head. 3 different modes of attack. Knife, throat slash, gun. Investigators looked at the scene and reached the same conclusion. This was overkill. The level of violence went far beyond what was necessary to kill someone. This was not about self-defense. It was about emotion, about control, about an act deeply personal. The 911 call was made right after the body was discovered, the voice on the other end trembling as it tried to describe the scene. As investigators began piecing together what had happened in that house, they returned to the most important question: who could have done this? The official investigation began immediately after Travis Alexander's body was discovered on June 9, 2008. But within the first few hours, investigators knew this was not a case that could be solved with simple assumptions. The level of violence at the scene, the number of wounds, and the manner of the attack showed the killer did not just want to kill Travis. They wanted to dominate him. They wanted to make sure he had no chance to fight back. And as they started examining the victim's closest relationships, the name Jodi Arias quickly rose to the top of the list to investigate. During her first interview, Jodi appeared cooperative. She said she had not seen Travis in a long time. She insisted she was not in Mesa on June 4, 2008. According to her, their relationship had ended and she had moved on from his life. Her answers were calm, clear, without hesitation. But just days later, the first pieces of data began to emerge that did not match her story. Phone records showed Jodi and Travis were still in contact right up to the time of the crime. Calls and messages occurred close to June 4th, directly contradicting her claim of no contact. It was not enough to charge her, but it was enough to keep investigators digging. And then a more critical detail surfaced at the scene. In the laundry room of the house, they found a washing machine. Inside was a digital camera. It had been soaped, turned upside down, as if someone had deliberately tried to ruin it. At the time, many believed the data inside had been completely destroyed, but investigators did not give up. They sent the device to the digital forensics lab, and when the data was recovered, the entire direction of the investigation began to shift. Photos taken on June 4, 2008 appeared one by one. At first, they were ordinary images. Travis in the bedroom, Travis in the bathroom, no signs of tension, no signs of danger. But as they continued, the timestamps moved closer to the final moments. A series of photos showed Travis still alive, standing in the shower, completely unaware of what was about to happen. And then the last photos appeared, blurry, angled, as if the camera had been dropped to the floor in chaos. But it was in those photos that investigators spotted a detail they could not ignore. A body part, a foot, a reflection. And all of it pointed to the same conclusion. Jodi Arias had been there. She had not just been at the scene, she had been there at the exact time Travis was still alive in the shower. These photos were not fabricated by police. This was direct, real-time evidence. And crucially, it came from Travis's own camera. When combined with phone records and other evidence, investigators began reconstructing the timeline. Jodi had rented a car in California, then driven to Arizona. She turned off her phone during the critical window, creating a gap in her movement data. After the crime, she continued traveling as if nothing had happened. This was not the behavior of someone who had been attacked and panicked. This was the behavior of someone trying to control every trace. When confronted with the new evidence, Jodi's story began to change. For the first time, she admitted being at the scene, but claimed two strangers had broken in and killed Travis. She described a man and a woman, but no evidence supported that story. As pressure mounted, she changed her account again. This time, she said she had killed Travis, but in self-defense, that he had attacked her, that she had no other choice. 3 versions, 3 different stories, and each time, she delivered them with the same calm as before. But investigators no longer needed words. They had images. They had DNA. Jodi's blood was found at the scene, mixed with Travis's. Not in one location, but in multiple areas throughout the room. That did not fit someone who was merely present by chance. It fit someone who had actively participated in the attack. By mid-July 2008, all the pieces were starting to fit together. And on July 15, 2008, Jodi Arias was arrested in California and charged with murder. What had begun as a name mentioned in friends' accounts had now become the primary suspect, backed by specific, clear, and irrefutable evidence. To understand how Jodi Arias could commit such brutality, investigators and later the jury had to go back years before the crime, to the moment these two people first met. In 2006, at a business conference in Las Vegas, Jodi met Travis Alexander. Travis was then a successful businessman, a motivational speaker, and a devout Mormon with very clear standards about life and relationships. Friends described him as charismatic, confident, and focused on his future. Jodi, in contrast, was quickly drawn to Travis almost immediately. Those around her noticed the change in her within a short time. She began adjusting herself, changing her lifestyle, even converting to Mormonism. Soon after, she moved closer to Travis, shortening the physical distance between them as if physical distance were the only obstacle to remove. Their relationship developed quickly, but it was unstable. It was on again, off again, sometimes close, sometimes distant, and there was one element neither could deny. Sex played a central role. Travis, with his religious beliefs, often felt conflicted about what he was doing. He did not see Jodi as marriage material, yet he continued the intimate relationship. That very conflict created mixed signals. For Travis, it may have been just an imperfect relationship, a prolonged mistake, but for Jodi, it was a deep bond she was not willing to let go of. When Travis began wanting to end it, everything started to change. He gradually created distance. He dated others. He told friends that Jodi made him uncomfortable. And while Travis tried to leave the relationship, Jodi did the opposite. She kept contacting him, She showed up unannounced. She stalked him. These behaviors were not always immediately obvious, but over time they formed a consistent pattern. Control. Investigators and later court psychologists concluded that the motive was not simply jealousy. It was a combination of jealousy, rejection, and an escalating need for control. Jodi did not just lose Travis. She lost control over someone she believed belonged to her. And for someone who could not accept losing control, that could become an extreme motivator. Experts called to testify at trial pointed to notable psychological traits. They spoke of obsession, of rapid shifts between love and rage, of inability to let go. Some assessments indicated signs of personality disorder, where emotions are unstable and relationships become intense but easily turn extreme. In that context, Jodi's behavior was no longer an impulsive reaction. It became a process, an accumulation. When all these factors were placed together, the unstable relationship, rejection, feeling replaced, need for control, the picture became clearer. This was not a situation where someone was backed into a corner and forced to defend herself. There was no evidence that Travis had posed a threat to that degree. Instead, the evidence pointed to something else. A person who refused to be discarded and decided to act in a way that ensured the other could never leave. The main trial began in January 2013 in Arizona, nearly 5 years after Travis Alexander's death, and from the very first days, the atmosphere in the courtroom showed this was not just an ordinary murder case. Prosecutor Juan Martinez came in with a clear strategy, not only to prove that Jodi Arias had killed Travis, but to prove it was a premeditated act, prepared and carried out with a level of brutality far beyond any claim of self-defense. Each piece of evidence was presented in a calculated sequence. The photos from the digital camera were shown in court, revealing Travis alive in the shower, then the final images capturing the chaos just before the camera fell. Not testimony, not speculation. This was what actually happened. Alongside that was the DNA evidence, confirming Jodi's blood was present at the scene, mixed with Travis's. The crime scene was described in detail to the jury, every bloodstain, every drag mark, every corner of the backroom where the attack took place. Prosecutors did not just talk about the death, they talked about how the death occurred. They emphasized the number of wounds, the combination of knife, throat slash, and gun, and concluded that this was not a panicked reaction. This was a controlled, prolonged, and deeply personal act. In a rare move for a first-degree murder defendant, Jodi chose to take the stand. That decision immediately drew attention. On the stand, she presented her version. She said it was self-defense, that Travis had attacked her, that she had been abused throughout the relationship, and when it happened, she only did what was necessary to survive. At times, she even said she did not clearly remember what happened after the attack began, that her memory was fragmented, that there were gaps she could not explain. But the problem was not one single story. The problem was too many stories. Throughout the investigation, Jodi had offered multiple versions. At first, she said she was not there. Then she said 2 strangers killed Travis. And now she said it was self-defense. During cross-examination, Prosecutor Martinez did not need to hunt for new weaknesses. He simply placed those versions side by side. Question after question, prior statements were repeated. Contradictions were laid bare before the jury. He asked about the time she lied. He asked why her story kept changing. He asked why there was no evidence of 2 strangers. And most importantly, he asked why someone acting in self-defense would inflict that level of damage. Those questions were not just for Jodi. They were for the jury. In addition, witnesses were called. Travis's friends described who he was, his relationship with Jodi, and the concerns he had shared. They said he was not the violent person Jodi described. Psychological experts were brought in to analyze Jodi's behavior, speaking of obsession, the need for control, and personality traits that could explain her actions. On the other side, the defense tried to reinforce the self-defense narrative, presenting arguments about abuse and psychological trauma. But as the trial deepened, the focus became clearer. It was not about small details, not about individual pieces of evidence. It was one single question everyone in that courtroom had to face. Could Jodi Arias' words be believed? The jury did not just sit and listen, they were allowed to ask questions, and they did. Hundreds of questions were submitted, many aimed directly at the contradictions in Jodi's testimony. Why did she lie at first? Why did she not call the police? Why did her behavior afterward not match someone who had just been attacked? Each question was not just a curiosity. It was a sign they were weighing, comparing, and evaluating the credibility of every word. On May 8, 2013, after months of intense litigation, the jury returned to the courtroom to deliver their verdict in the Jodi Arias case, and in the moment everyone had been waiting for. The final answer was announced. Guilty. First-degree murder, not manslaughter, not self-defense, not an act in panic, but premeditated, calculated murder. When those words rang out in the courtroom, Jodi's first reaction was not collapse. She did not burst into tears immediately, no screaming, no loss of control. Instead, she sat still, almost motionless for a few seconds, as if processing the information she had just heard. Her face changed very slightly. Her eyes flickered for a moment, but only briefly, and she quickly regained her familiar calm. Her body language remained controlled. Shoulders did not slump. Hands did not visibly tremble. That was not the reaction many expected from someone just convicted of first-degree murder and facing the possibility of the death penalty. Meanwhile, Travis Alexander's family could not maintain such composure. When the verdict was read, many broke down crying. Some hugged each other, some bowed their heads, not out of joy, but because a long journey had finally reached a temporary endpoint. For them, justice was not joy. It was relief mixed with loss. But even in that moment, no one could bring Travis back. No one could erase what had happened in that bathroom on June 4th, 2008. Outside the courtroom, the media had followed this case for years, and when the verdict came down, the attention exploded. News channels broadcast live. Legal experts dissected every detail. The public debated not just the crime, but the person of Jodi Arias. She was no longer just a defendant. She had become a symbol of a type of criminal many could not fully comprehend. Calm, controlled, and seemingly never truly showing remorse in the way others expected. But even though the verdict was clear, the legal story was far from over. The next phase began, determining the penalty. Prosecutors continued to argue that the brutality of the crime warranted the death penalty. They emphasized the number of wounds, the method of attack, and what Travis had endured in the final minutes of his life. The defense objected, arguing that even though Jodi was guilty, she should still be allowed to live, that her circumstances and psychology needed to be considered. The jury was required to reach unanimous agreement, but this time they could not. The result was a hung jury. No final decision, no death sentence was passed, but no conclusive end either. That meant the process had to continue. Another trial was scheduled. Once again, the parties returned to the same evidence, the same arguments, the same unresolved question. Should Jodi Arias live or die? Throughout that process, Jodi's public image remained remarkably consistent. She appeared in court with her familiar composure, the same controlled gaze, the same straight-backed posture, the same way of conferring with her attorney, as if she were part of a strategy, not facing the consequences of a crime. Sometimes she smiled very faintly. Sometimes she scanned the courtroom with an observant look. Those small details were not overlooked. For many following the case, that very calm became part of the story, an element that made the case even more baffling. It did not diminish the severity of what had happened. On the contrary, it highlighted the contrast between the brutality of the past and the composure of the present. And as the legal system continued to move forward, one thing became clear. Whatever the final outcome, Jodi Arias' image in the courtroom, calm, controlled, and almost unshaken, would continue to haunt the public. In 2015, the justice system finally reached a final decision on Jodi Arias' punishment. The jury once again could not reach unanimous agreement on the death penalty, and under Arizona state law, the judge would make the ultimate ruling. The sentence was pronounced life in prison without the possibility of parole. No release date, no chance for reduction, no second door. For Jodi, that meant the rest of her life behind bars. But what drew attention was not just the sentence, but how she reacted to it. Earlier, in interviews and even during the trial itself, Jodi had said that if given the choice, she would choose the death penalty. She called it ultimate freedom, a quick end rather than decades in prison. Those statements confused the public, a defendant facing death but viewing it as the easier option. But when the final sentence was handed down, Jodi no longer had that choice. She did not react violently. She did not collapse. She stood there, still maintaining her familiar control, as if accepting an outcome she had prepared for long before. However, what was notable was that even in her final statements, she did not fully accept responsibility in the way many expected. She acknowledged her actions, but continued to justify them. Still spoke of fear. Still repeated the self-defense story. Still held on to parts of the version she had told throughout the trial. There was no clear definitive apology that could close everything. No complete admission of what happened in that bathroom on June 4, 2008. Meanwhile, Travis Alexander's family once again stood before the court and spoke about what they had lost. They did not talk about the law. They did not talk about strategy. They talked about Travis, about the person he had been, about the void he left behind, about the years that passed without full answers. For them, this sentence brought no joy. It only brought a necessary form of closure, a confirmation that what happened was real, and the person responsible would no longer be free. When placing the two fates side by side, the contrast became stark. Travis lost his life in an attack he could not escape. Jodi lost her freedom, not in a moment, but in every remaining day of her life. One had no chances left. The other had all the time in the world to think about what she had done. But one thing this case made clearer than anything else: the truth cannot be erased. From the beginning, Jodi believed she could control the story. She believed there were no witnesses, that the scene could be cleaned, that what happened in that house would exist only in her words. She thought she had left no trace. But in that very moment, when she pressed the shutter, when the camera captured those final seconds, evidence was created. It was not forgotten, not erased, not altered by later statements. It existed, steadfast, until it was discovered and presented in court. And in the end, it was the evidence she could not control that told the entire truth. This is the case of someone who believed she could perfectly conceal a crime, but unwittingly recorded herself in the act. And every detail in the story is not speculation, but has been confirmed through court records, forensic evidence, and the very images she left behind. If you want to follow more true crime cases with haunting details like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next episodes.